I sort of cannot believe I'm about to film this video. This is my June 2022 wrap-up, sharing the 13 books, poems, plays that I read in the month of June. This whole book-related videos is definitely new for me. I do create content in other ways, but this type of content and creating content around sort of literature is quite new for me. So welcome, I'm sure you are new here. My name is Kira. I'm a speech and drama teacher based in Dublin, Ireland. So this channel is really going to be talking about different literature and especially looking at it from a performer's perspective. And I think that's sort of going to provide a bit of a unique twist on reading, because when I look for books to read and things like that, obviously it is coming from a place of personal enjoyment, but then there's also a part of me that's looking for passages that might be good solo pieces for a student, or something that might be a good group piece for a class that I might be teaching. So hopefully that will be of interest to a lot of you. I'm not sure what your background is, but if I'm doing anything wrong in this sort of booktube space, please give me some pointers. I'm sure a lot of you will know a lot more than me. But I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read this month, including some that I read on Kindle and some that were also on audiobooks. I don't know what counts and what doesn't count. I've been watching lots of different people's videos and some people include audiobooks. Let's get into it. So June has been a fantastic reading month for me in the end. It didn't start off super strong, and this is a month where I was really hoping to up my reading, because not only doing speech and drama teaching, but I'm also a PhD student, and I have not been taking much time for my own hobbies in the last couple of months or couple of years or however long, and I really just wanted to up my reading. So I just put down a goal to read 2 books this month, 2, and I'm finishing up this month having read 13 books. Can you believe it? I cannot believe it. I can't. Even halfway through this month, I sort of looked at the progress, which was very little, and I was thinking, there's no way I'm even going to get through 2 books. And pooh, was there a change. So early on in the month, I started off with an audiobook called Work Party by Jacqueline Johnson, and this is a non-fiction book. It's basically like a personal development book around creating the life and career, I suppose, you really want as a young millennial woman. And I think just because I've been consuming a lot of content around that, and you know, I've learned a lot about that in the last couple of years myself, I feel like this book didn't necessarily provide me anything new. Whereas I think if I was coming at this, if I had this book a couple of years ago, I probably would have rated it higher, but for where I am now, it was more like a 3.5 stars for what I need. But it wasn't a 3.5 star book, if that makes sense. So I definitely would recommend it. I definitely do recommend it, if that makes sense. And then I didn't read anything for like another 2 weeks. And then I was looking at my reading goals. I'd sort of forgotten that I read that book, and I was thinking, I've read nothing this month. I really need to step it up. So the first thing that I decided to read was this collection of poetry by Sylvia Plath called Ariel, which is her best known works of poetry, I guess. Look how nice this cover is. Can you just witness this? And the back is pretty as well. Yeah. What can I say? Sylvia Plath is definitely one of my top poets. And this book was a gift from one of my teaching diploma students in 2020. So they studied their teaching diploma in speech and drama under me. And obsessed. Such a nice looking book, but I hadn't really gotten around to fully reading a lot of the poems, and I eventually did, and I did something that most people will find very illegal, which is I basically every second poem is highlighted as a really good poem. So I can't give this anything other than 5 stars, because I just think Sylvia Plath's poetry is amazing, and there were so many poems in here that I hadn't seen before that I just really, really enjoyed. And what I love about her poetry is you just don't really know what's going on. You need to spend a bit of time with her poems, which I do really like. They're so rich in language. It's just, yeah. Even this poem, Ariel, the first couple of lines Stasis in darkness, then the substanceless blue, pour of Tor and distances. Like, what does that mean? Do you know what I mean? And I love Plath's poems, so this was definitely a 5-star for me. The next book I read then was A Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and this was on Kindle, and I think I need to get a physical copy of this book. And I've had some exposure to this book before. I've definitely performed an extract of it before, but I don't think I ever properly fully read the whole book. I've read a lot of Oscar Wilde plays and short stories, and I know the premise of this book, I know the general story, but I think in order to fully give it 5 stars, there's something about needing to read the physical copy to get it to that level. I do think that just sort of happens. So for now it's a 4-star, but I think it will be a 5-star. The basic premise of A Picture of Dorian Gray is this young man who's quite attractive, essentially wants to preserve his youth and in a way, you know, loses his character. And yeah, see, I don't want to give too much away. I don't know how this works, but he basically isn't the nicest person. He's that sort of person who's great on the outside but not very nice on the inside, and there's a lot of sort of discourse around morals. I'll try and get better at describing these books, but that's where I'm at for the moment with that one. The next book I read on Audible, and that was Dubliners by James Joyce. So I listened to this the week sort of leading up to Bloomsday, which is the 16th of June, which is a sort of day in Ireland where we celebrate James Joyce. I really enjoyed these stories. I think, I don't know, I like a lot of them, and I think I'd give individual ones 5 stars for sure and other ones fewer stars. So I think on the whole I'd give this like 3.5 stars. Dubliners is a collection of short stories set in Dublin, and James Joyce really captures, I think, a good sense of Dublin life at the time. And his stories go from having the main character either in the first person or in the third person at different ages. So as you progress through the book, the character is sort of older or at a different stage in life. And all of the stories are sort of centered around a moment of epiphany. And a lot of James Joyce's writing has that in common, where it is about that moment of something in your mind clicking or changing, and I find that really interesting. So a lot of the stories have these very mundane settings and there's not really a lot happening, and then there is this sort of moment of realization, which is a really interesting thing to read and to come across, I think, as a reader. My favorite short story in there would be The Dead. I absolutely love that short story, and again, it's made a great extract for us as a performance piece before. The ones that I really sort of liked or were intrigued by were mostly at the beginning of the book. So I really liked Araby, Evelyn. A Painful Case was also really interesting, and then Clay, and then A Little Cloud as well. It's a very interesting collection of stories. I think you really get these senses of these moments of people's lives that you just sort of feel like you're getting a brief glimpse into someone's thoughts for just a brief moment, and I do think that's really interesting. So I definitely would recommend. I think maybe I could bump it up to 4 stars, and definitely some of those stories I'd give 5 stars, but then some of them I'd give 3 stars. The next book I read then is this book here, None of This Is Serious, by Catherine Prasivka, and this is by an Irish based author. And yeah, it's set in Ireland, in Dublin. And look at this book. We've got the red spine, which does unfortunately like run a little bit, but mostly not. And then we've got this sort of smashed self-image, which is really interesting. I really loved the cover of this book, and that's really what drew me to it more than anything. Especially, oh, we love this, don't we? So this is the author's first book, and I really enjoyed the premise of this book. I think the first chapter especially was really strong, really good, and I think that in itself, there's a passage that I could see making a really good reading aloud piece. But I think on the whole, there were some problems that I had with this. The basic premise is it's that sort of college age students in their sort of 20s, finishing up college or university and not knowing what to do next, and we're in that sort of transitional phase, which I think is so relatable for young people, especially Dublin, very tumultuous times in terms of the housing crisis and everything, and that's very clear, and just the world we live in with sort of social media as well. Basically, something happens which is a big split happens in the sky, and the sky has this big like purple crack essentially in it. They're not really sure what it is, and then there's all this sort of reaction to what could it be, what do we do, how does that change things, and the sort of social media points of view and all of this. And it really just reminded me of COVID. I don't know, was that intentional that it was like that sort of how people reacted, but that's definitely what I sort of noticed from it. And I did really enjoy it, but there was parts of the writing that I didn't really enjoy. I think that there was, for me, I like when things are quite stylistic, and there was too many like similes used rather than just having the actual metaphor, if that makes sense. And I just didn't really enjoy that. And because it was first person, I generally find with first person books, you're just getting one person's point of view, and sometimes that can be a very stilted point of view. I feel like there wasn't much compassion for the other characters, and there's definitely some bad characters in here, like characters we aren't meant to like. But when we do have just sort of like a straight villain, I think that can sort of make it less relatable in a way, and that's just something that I found. And I did really not enjoy the main character, because even on the back, like it says, a stunning searing vision of modern neurosis and female experience in the online age. And I think the character, definitely like trigger warning for like eating disorders or just like general self-image issues maybe. The character had a really sort of low self-image, and just the discourse around food I just didn't really enjoy. It made me quite uncomfortable, and I'm sure that was the intent. Yeah, I don't know. There's just parts of it that I didn't like, so I'm going to give this 3 stars and feel really bad about it, because I think she's a really good writer, even though I didn't necessarily enjoy parts of the writing. And the book was just gorgeous, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what she does next, because if this is her first book, like, whoa. And like, just to say, I barely put this book down. Like, I read it in about a day, like 24-hour period, I'd say, as did I do this book, which is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. This is Sally Rooney's first book, and I think, unfortunately for Catherine, the reason that I had to just, you know, scale things was because this is Sally Rooney's first book, and it is phenomenal. I don't know how to describe Sally Rooney's writing. She really captures what it's like to date in Dublin. I think there's the way that courting occurs in Ireland is very different to how it does in other places. There is that general sense of like not knowing if the person you're talking to is in love with you or hates you, and it's very confusing. So with this book, I think, so it's looking at 4 people, 2 young girls, girls in their 20s who used to be together, and then there's a couple who are older in their sort of 30s who are together but, you know, don't have necessarily the best marriage, and then, you know, things ensue, or do they, perhaps. And it's called Conversations with Friends, and it's so lovely. The cover, the colours, everything, loved it. I had read Sally Rooney's Beautiful World, Where Are You earlier this year. Didn't love it, so I was a bit afraid of this book, but I devoured it. It's one of those things like I couldn't wait to keep reading this, whereas the other one I was like, I just want to get through it a bit. This one I was like, oh, when's my next minute to get into this book? And I really, really enjoyed it. There's just something about it, you just want to devour it completely. Really enjoyed it. I don't know how to explain it other than that. I think you'll either love it or hate it. And if you've read other books by Sally Rooney, I think if you've read Normal People, you'll like this. But I think there's probably a split happening. I've seen people who didn't like Normal People and didn't like this, who really enjoyed Beautiful World, Where Are You? And I'd say I'm the other way around. Now, I've seen the TV show of this since, and I have to say, as much as I enjoyed all the actors and everything, I just didn't think it did the book justice. I don't think it had the same tone. I feel like there was people in the show I felt bad for that I didn't feel bad for in the book, and there was things I thought were, not really right in the book. That kind of way. I just didn't feel like it lined up 100%, but I gave this 5 stars. I was going to give it 4 stars because I don't know how to judge things just yet, but like, I don't know what would consider a 5-star if not this, because I couldn't put it down and I couldn't stop thinking about it afterwards either. So I think it has to be that. The next book I read then was just a simple short book of poetry, Starlight and Moonshine, Poetry of the Supernatural by William Shakespeare. Essentially, it's just a really nice sort of illustrated collection of extracts from different Shakespeare plays. Most of them are from Midsummer Night's Dream, but the one that I just opened is from Romeo and Juliet, and it's just gorgeous as a book. So I got this more for the school, but I did read it, I did look at it, and I'd sort of come across most of these passages before, so just for that I was like, it's a 3-star read, because it's not really like a book. It didn't really bring me much in a way. The next book I read then was on Kindle, so I'll just pop up a little something here, and that was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Maybe I just don't necessarily enjoy reading books on Kindle as much. You might see this as a bit of a theme, but as much as I liked it and found good passages in it that could be good for performance material, I just didn't I wasn't blown away, and I know it had been a book that was really popularized, so I was just expecting a bit more. I don't know what I was looking for, but it wasn't it. The book is basically set in one night and the next morning of a party in Malibu, and this sort of central family that are throwing the party, the Rivas, and it goes through their whole sort of family history of their parents and everything. So it goes back in time a lot to show all of that, and there's all these sort of subplots and this and that. And then I don't know, nothing really happens in the book, but there are lots of nice sort of descriptive passages, I guess. And yeah, I gave it 3 stars. I just didn't love it. So that's all we'll get from that one. The next book then, because I had such a good time with conversations with friends, I went in, I got Sally Rooney's Normal People, and wow, did I really enjoy this. I really wanted to read this for ages. I wasn't sure how I'd respond to it, but wow, I loved it. And I haven't seen the show yet, so that'll be my next thing. I started at 4 p.m. I read it in 3, maybe an hour to 90-minute sessions, I'd say, in the same evening. And I just couldn't, it was one of those ones again, I could not wait to get back into this. Again, similar to the other book, it sort of captures the sort of Dublin dating scene, although the 2 characters are from the countryside initially. And it just captures really what the relationships are like here, I think, 100%. And especially she captures attraction and just not knowing what to do with it, almost not knowing how to overcome it between people at times, and the way that it doesn't always really make sense and people just often get drawn together, and it was fantastic. So it follows 2 main characters, Connell and Marianne, who are from the same small town, and then they start getting together while they're in school, and then they eventually goes to the time when they're in college and things have shifted a lot. And I really liked the timeline of this book, so the way it sort of would be 3 months later, 6 months later, that's what each of the chapters were titled, and I really just liked that. It sort of felt like you were in it, and you were what has happened in this time. And a lot of the time, the way she writes, she starts us off at a random moment and then will explain the night before, which is sort of the big event, but she's explaining as the characters' reflections on it rather than it happening in the moment, which is really interesting. So 5 stars again, would definitely recommend. The next thing I read was Raging which is a collection of 3 plays about 7 years of warfare in Ireland by Irish playwright Deirdre Kinahan, who is past pupil of the school that I teach in and run in speech and drama. This was a really interesting read. There's 3 different plays, and essentially the goal with these plays, I know from talking to the writer, are around sharing the woman's perspective or point of view or place in times of war, because we often hear about history and you hear that phrase of the winners write the history books, and this sort of just looks at what other people's perspectives were. And it was really interesting, heartbreaking, very, very good read. The plays are sort of memory plays, so the characters talk about the events and it's quite stylized. There's bits of a choral work in it, which I think is always really interesting. It's not like a direct action based play, if that makes sense. The action isn't happening in it, it's more being talked about and reflected on. And I wish I'd gotten to see these in person, and I'm sad that I didn't, but I'm hoping that I'll get to see more of Deirdre Kinahan's work in the future. The next play I read was 12th Night by William Shakespeare. Now, you tell me what you think counts here, because I watched a production of it while reading the play and going to find passages from the play as I was watching. And it was the full production, all of the scenes were included. It's sort of like an audio book, except for you also have the visual element. So you tell me if this counts, but you know, it was 2.5 hours of my life, so I hope it counts. And wow, did I really enjoy this play. I do think it helps when you watch a really good production. So I have access to National Theatre at home, and the National Theatre in the UK put on great productions, especially I love their Shakespeare productions. Phenomenal. And I had a sense of 12th Night. I had seen a couple of bits of it before. If you haven't seen the movie She's the Man with Amanda Bynes, that is based on 12th Night by Shakespeare. A lot of the character names and everything are preserved, and the general plot, I guess. So I knew what was going to happen and that, but I really enjoyed this play. I got so many good ideas for solo pieces, duologue scenes, group scenes. Really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, I gave 5 stars. I loved it. Oh, I gave Raging by Deirdre Kinahan 4 stars, just because I think it's one of those things, if I'd seen it I might have felt different, but it's the difficulty, I think, with literature experiences. How you experience a piece of literature for the first time, it really does affect how you feel about it, I think, in the long run. And that's something that I needed to probably read out loud and didn't. But anyways, the next book I read was on Kindle, and that was The Christie Affair by, who was it by? Nina de Gramont. I don't know if that's correct pronunciation. But basically this book is a fictionalized book about something that really happened. So Agatha Christie went missing for 11 days in 1926, I think, after her husband said that he wanted a divorce so that he could marry his lover, his mistress. And the book centers around the mistress and her story. And I started reading this book months ago and really didn't enjoy it. First of all, because I didn't realize this had really happened, and I was like, why would somebody write this book? It doesn't make any sense. But then I realized it had actually happened. But anyways, and also just because the way it was moving through the plot, it just didn't make any sense. Like, I don't mind a book where there's lots of plots, but I don't like when we're going to go into one plot for 8 chapters and then go into another plot for 8 chapters. It feels like almost at least that long. That's what it felt like. And you're just like, I don't know why you're telling me all this. Do you know what I mean? And it did all come together in the end. And what I liked about it, there was featuring of the Magdalen laundries, which is a really harrowing time in Irish history, where young girls who would become pregnant out of wedlock would be sent to work in the Magdalen laundries and have their babies, who were then given up for adoption against the girls' wills a lot of the time, or killed, died. in some way or another, and it's a really awful time in history. It happened in, I know, a lot of countries, but especially it's a big part of Irish history in the Magdalen laundries, so there is a big feature of that. There's a lot of dark Irish history stuff in there, and I'm sort of wondering where the writer got that from, because I don't think they're Irish, but don't know. And I think there's some beautiful passages in there about motherhood and the loss of a child. Some really nice passages, so I've highlighted a bunch of passages from it, but I think I still on the whole didn't really enjoy the book, so I gave it 3 stars. And the final book, which I just finished today, was a non-fiction read which is about William Shakespeare's plays, and it was an 18-hour lecture series which I listened to in the last couple of weeks. William Shakespeare, Comedies, Histories, Tragedies, and that is on Audible as well. I'll have a link down below. And essentially this is a lecture series that goes through a lot of Shakespeare's plays in 2 30-minute or 3 30-minute lectures, and just provide some perspective about the different plays and some of the key features that make them, I suppose, worth a watch or worth a read. I've read a lot of Shakespeare plays, but I'm trying to get through the rest of them, I guess, in the next sort of year or so, and I found this was really useful, really insightful, and it really sort of pointed out some key moments to look out for when you're watching or reading some of the other plays, and I definitely would recommend. So I gave that 4 stars. That is it for my June wrap up, so thank you so much for watching, and I would very much appreciate it if you made it this far. You might as well subscribe, leave me a little comment down below, say something nice, say something mean, it doesn't really matter, and I'll see you all next time.